Welcome to the Smooth MOOC on Universal Design, Accessibility Planning and Social Inclusion. This has been created under the Global Center of Spatial Methods for Urban Sustainability at the Technical University TU Berlin, funded by the German Academic Exchange Service DAAD. These modules have been curated under the aegis of the Laboratory of Inclusive Design LID at IIT Roorkee. I am Rwitee Mandal. I am an urban design specialist at Safetipin and a visiting faculty at the Urban Design Program at the School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. I will be speaking on building gender-friendly cities, which is the sixth module of this online course. Let's look at some learning objectives. And these will be to understand how unsafe, inaccessible, and inequitable urban spaces limit the mobility and opportunities of women and others. To study key concepts around how women and girls experience and navigate cities differently due to social and cultural factors. To learn from best practices and strategies for creating public spaces that are accessible, safe, and inclusive for all. Let's understand whose city is it? Does the city belong to everyone? Do everyone have equal or same experiences in the city? Or can everyone access the city in the same way? That's probably not true. Due to different territorial factors such as localization, mobility, accessibility, cities are not experienced nor lived in the same way by men, women, children, elderly, and people with disability. They do not or are not able to use and enjoy public spaces, resources, and services in the same way or to the same extent. As you know, gender is a social construct, and this unequal gender relationship manifests itself how spaces in the city or cities are kind of shaped, planned, and constructed. And these unequal gender relationships also are at different scales in the city. It could be the housing, it could be the neighborhood, or the city itself. And then we need to understand that what does really right to the city means. It really means that everyone, irrespective of their gender, age, ability, race, class, economic status, everyone has equal right to the city or everything the city has to offer. So if you have to imagine a city in which everybody has equal right to it, it would be a city which is free of violence. And over here, we are focusing on gender inclusive cities, and we are focusing on women especially. So it would be a city where it is free of violence from physical, psychological, verbal, material, or symbolic against women in public and private spheres. A city that ensures safe access, use, and enjoyment of public spaces, common amenities, and resources. A city that guarantees freedom of mobility. A city where fear does not limit freedom. A city that enables women's right to decide about their own bodies. But as we see, cities are not really designed from an inclusive perspective. They at times have a default user in mind, and that user is an able bodied, privileged, 30 something heterosexual male user. And the cities are often designed from that perspective. And because of which, there are these social, structural, and physical restrictions which are kind of embedded in the city, and which is why the city is not kind of experienced, used, or accessed by everyone equally. And these social, structural, and physical restrictions, They limit access to opportunities and resources, especially for women and other vulnerable groups. And this kind of translates into inadequate services and amenities, like that of housing, healthcare, education, public amenities, police, transport, etc. And the lack of safety in public spaces and transport, which is a very big and important point, which deters women's access to public space. And all of this happens because of there is low representation in decision making, and there is already, like we spoke of, there is an imagination of a default user of the city, which is why policy, city planning, and development gets shaped in a particular way. And together, all of this, it impacts women's perception and experience of the city in realizing their full potential and functioning as independent, rightful citizens. If we look at some global data um, of public space, or how women, experience public space, we see that 1 in 3 women globally have experienced some form of physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. And this data kind of accounts for the whole range of experiences, which is within homes and outside homes. But some of the data which particularly focus on public transport and public spaces are seen to have very striking numbers. Women globally, it is seen women face some form of sexual harassment in public transport or public spaces. Women surveyed in 140 Indian cities revealed 56% of them being sexually harassed while using public transport. In 3 Latin American cities, 57% female respondents have faced sexual harassment at least once in public transport, and 17% said that they have faced sexual harassment more than 5 times. So this perception of unsafety, which is built because of physical restrictions being there, social and structural restrictions, and also because of this diverse experience of women of public space, this is enough to restrict full rights of women to the city. So if we have to focus on building women responsive cities or women friendly cities, we need to keep certain principles in mind. And that would be to move beyond a crime focused perspective of cities, understand the deep impact of fear and violence on women and others, focus on the right to the city to shape policies, services, infrastructure to build a culture of equity and inclusion, recognize care work central to human existence and well being, address the gender data gap by collecting data and evidence, basically by collecting gender disaggregated data at various stages of life. Look at intersectionality to understand the unique challenges women and others face. The work of care. Because of unequal gender relationship, society places the work of care on women. And now women, when they have joined the workforce, they have to straddle between these two responsibilities. One is social in nature, the other is economic in nature. And it is seen that women, because of this social responsibility or larger responsibility which the society places on them, they are in different types of economic engagement, which are informal in nature, which are part-time, which are at most of the times they are, less paid. And it is seen that women spend 4.1 times more time in Asia and the Pacific in unpaid care work than men. Data from 64 countries represent 2/3 of the world's working age population show that 16.4 billion hours per day are spent in unpaid care work. Worldwide, 2.1 billion people needed care in 2015, and by 2030, this number is expected to reach 2.3 billion. So, to carry out this care responsibility or to perform this care responsibility within their homes or in some other home or in public space, it is seen that women traverse through public space differently than men. Men's movement pattern is more or less linear in fashion. They go from home to work or maybe some in between place. But women, because of their care responsibilities, they are moving around in the city differently. They are going from home to work, or maybe going to the school in between, or to shopping or to a clinic. And then again, when they're coming back from work, they're again visiting maybe a leisure space, picking up children, going back home, coming to a clinic. So their movement patterns are short and they're linked to each other, and they are kind of quite intense, but they're kind of invisible because they don't kind of operate in the peak hours. And this is called trip chaining. And some of the key things which came out of that is that women cycle less and walk more than men. Women use cars less and public transport more than men. Women use cheaper and less efficient modes of transport. Women travel shorter distances and are limited to restricted geographical area. Women are more likely to work at home and to locate their businesses closer to home. Women are more likely to travel during off peak hours and engage in more non work travel, as in travel which does not include work travel. Women make more multi stop trips daily. And this also kind of links to another concept which is called time poverty, which says that because all of this is done during the day, it takes up a lot of time. And also, this perception of unsafety of public spaces also is linked to it, that in during the night maybe the public spaces are perceived as unsafe, so you limit most of your activities during the day. Hence it becomes a packed day, leaving no time for themselves, which kind of impacts their health and well-being. So if we have to look at that, what are the key elements of public space so that they are kind of used by everyone equally? They should be safe, inclusive, and accessible. Safe, which is from the freedom of fear of public spaces for all user groups. Inclusive, for all user groups are able to participate and enjoy public space and public life. And accessible, enabling all groups to easily traverse the through public space. And this is a city, an imagination of a city, which is a women responsive city, which looks at women at different age groups, like girls, they're young people, they're elderly, and other genders as well, which is trans, queer, all of that. And here the city is kind of looked at from different kind of functions the city has in terms of housing, public spaces, educational institution, transport, all of that, and different kinds of public spaces, which are streets and squares and public grounds, all of that. The street corners, playgrounds, parks, and different functions which support women in their daily lives and in this trip chaining or time poverty and all of that, which is this image is looking at creche. They're looking at which is in a walking in proximity, so it's in walking distance, so you can go to there quickly. A safe house, a public clinic, a toilet, public transport systems, which is cycling, walking, autos, metro, buses, etc., all of that. So all that imagination of an inclusive city or a responsive city, all the functions, all the support system services which is required, is kind of put together to see how a city will look like if we have given focus to all these areas. In public spaces, streets play a very important role. I feel streets are like this, system of veins which, you know, connects all parts of the city, and it's like a glue which holds the city together, and because of which streets are the main kind of ways of accessing or reaching different points of the city. Streets need to get the maximum focus of making them safe, accessible, and inclusive, in which Jane Jacobs in 1960s, when she wrote this book about the the death and life of great American cities, which was really against modernist ways of planning and mono use kind of city which was coming into the planning domain. And it was really a criticism on that, saying that it will remove the character of the cities, the streets which have eyes upon them, and that's a coin she termed, which is eyes upon the street, which says that the eyes belonging to those we might call the natural proprietors of of the street, which is people who are on the street or by the street. They are really the guardians of the street. And it also links to a concept which is called natural surveillance. They People who, these different sets of eyes from different backgrounds, from different activities, they are really the deterrents for any kind of antisocial activity happening in a street. The street also needs to have something called the enclosure quality, which is to say that how the street addresses the human scale. Sometimes streets are too wide, so human beings are not able to engage with the street because they get lost in the scale. Okay. Sometimes the streets are too narrow and they might feel claustrophobic because they're tall buildings which feels that they're going to fall over you. So actually, there is a technical way of addressing it, and here we are kind of looking at a larger perspective on it, and we're not really getting the technical aspect of it. So, which I'm just kind of addressing it by saying that there is a adequate human scale which needs to address and treat that human scale in such a way so that people are able to engage with the street, which is basically another technical word which is called the edge conditions. And edge conditions really means that what is really happening at the edges of the street, whether there is an entrance, whether there is a balcony, whether there is a shop, whether there is a little courtyard, whether there are vendors, whether all of that. So what is really happening at the ground floor of the street is a critical thing, because that those are the ways of engagement for people with the street. And the streets, which are full of activity, are more engaging, are essentially safer in nature, and will have the component of natural surveillance, which is eyes on the street. And here we look at another imagination of a street, which looks like a drawing, which is on an illustration of a Parisian street, maybe, which really looks at this edge condition. And so, what I was talking about is actually the scale of the street. So, everybody is kind of able to engage with the street and feels comfortable within the scale of the street. Then these are these edge conditions where there is a shop, there is an entrance, there is a little probably window, little ice cream shop, things like that. And then you can walk clearly on the street, and you can do different vending and sitting and different engagement kind of opportunities by the street. And the eyes on the street is both what is happening at the ground level as well as what is happening from the level above. Like you see, one person is looking down, another is looking down from the other side. There are balconies, there are staircases, there are these windows, and all of these together make a safe, inclusive, and accessible street. Transport is another very, very important factor in making public spaces or building women responsive cities. Transportation is not just about moving people from point A to point B. It's about connecting women to economic opportunities, healthcare, education, and social services. And so, if you have to look at the key elements of a robust transportation system, we have to look at safety, we have to address safety, affordability, so that it's cheap and affordable for everyone, for different economic backgrounds. It has to be accessible for people with different abilities, should be able to access it. It should have good coverage, and by coverage, you mean that at times where the city core, where has the maximum kind of business districts are there, a lot of activities are happening, a lot of functions in terms of schools, offices, everything is there in the core. The transportation system at times only kind of focuses on that. Whereas at the peripheries, where there are residences, lower income settlements, where there are different kinds of mainly residential areas, that gets left out. And so those areas need better connectivity, especially for women, from to move from home to the city. And information, that is another crucial thing, that if you don't have the correct information of the service, what time it is going to be there, if it's delayed or not, whether it's available or not, all that information, real time information, is required. The last but not the least, actually, a very important component of transport is last mile connectivity. Whereas public transport or mass transportation systems are not always able to connect to the last door of every individual. So they kind of operate in a larger scale, in the larger, in the core of the city, or in the larger or peripheral, or sorry, in the main streets, along the main streets of the cities. But where the mass transit system or the bus system or something drops you off from there, if you have to go to your office or to your home, you are either dependent on walking or cycling or taking an intermediate transport, which could be an auto, which could be a shared vehicle, which could be a cycle rickshaw, something like that. So in that is very important, because these are the fillers and these are the binders of the mass transport system, and this completes the network. People should be able to move from one transport system to the other seamlessly, which makes the transport system better. And if this last mile or first mile connectivity is poor, then access to services, healthcare, education becomes weak. So if you have to really look at now that, how do we then kind of put all of these together? Who is going to make the decisions in making, and how do we kind of address every user group from being gender absent and kind of making it a gender mainstreaming? So, gender mainstreaming is a public policy concept that seeks to ensure women, men, and other genders are accounted for equally in policy, legislation, resources, allocation. The goal is to provide equal access to all resources. And in understanding this, we need to understand also intersectionality. Because if we only look at groups of people as men, women, trans, different groups of people, we don't understand that people and each one of us do stand at an intersection of age, ability, race, caste, creed, etc., religion, all of that. And if you're kind of and those who are at the intersection, their experiences of the same thing is different from the other. And if we have to address at policies to look at, to have everyone have equal access to it, we need to address these different narratives or experiences and provide different kind of functions and supports for them, so that they can access these policies equally. Let's look at some examples now and strategies which has been undertaken by cities to make them more responsive to women. One of the examples, a pioneering example in that, is the Vienna's Women Work City, It's also called the Fair Shared City, in which one whole district was uh, built on the principle of proximity. Because what we saw, or what we just learned on the movement pattern of women in the city, which was called trip chaining, we saw that women were responsible. Like I said, women are responsible for the care work, and because of the care work, they have to go to these different destinations of the city. But what if we make a housing unit, or sorry, housing neighborhood in such a way so that these trips are short and within reach? So this housing development looked at different kinds of units, and it was also intergenerational, and it looked at different kinds of spaces within the development, which from smaller spaces, open spaces, to larger open spaces, and how these open spaces are, next to next to a residential block, so that when smaller children play, the mothers can overlook or the parents can overlook. There are different kinds of spaces for different types of people, and they are distributed keeping the user in mind. So they also, like I said, they were also looking at housing units at intergenerational units, where looked at that the same unit should have flexibility and adaptability built into it, so that, from a couple or a single person or an elderly person, or a couple with children, or young people, all these different combinations of families, or different combinations of single and people together can live in the same unit, and kind of alter the unit for their use. Similarly, open spaces were also studied and seen that boys and girls play differently, and hence larger playing spaces for children, assuming that both the groups will play in the same way in that open space, is not probably right, which is why open spaces or these play spaces were detailed further for playing zones for girls and boys, where they can explore different kinds of plays. It was also, the city was also kind of uh, intervened, and different kind levels of interventions were done. One of the levels of interventions was on footpaths or sidewalks, and looking at these different kind of levels which were there in the city, so that ramps were added somewhere where ramps couldn't be added, elevators were added, sidewalks were made wider, public transport, tram stops or bus stops were integrated in them. So basically, to build a whole network of things which kind of supports women in their daily activities. Seoul also came up with a public policy kind of intervention, public intervention policy, in which it looked at that, different aspects of the city, that how do you make cities more responsive for women. So there was a set of activities given under Caring Soul, which had more to look at that how creches, daycares, etc. All of this can be built more as where they're needed in the city. So the distribution, as per the location and density of the city. Active soul, more how streets could be made or more active and safer. Abundant soul, where they were looking at more open spaces, fairgrounds, etc. All of that for better engagement. Safe soul, they were looking at safety through different set of strategies. And convenience, so soul, which was looking at healthcare, education, etc. So in which one of the interesting things which they did, I think this was a very good example of how, since the city of Seoul is a high density city, and it's built to edge, and it's got really tall kind of multi-storied structures there, and have deep basements, it was seen that the basements were really areas of which were really unsafe. So they reserved parking lots and marked them for women, near the course where the lift, the staircase, etc., all is there. There was the light was always supposed to be on over there. There is a CCTV camera so that in women can quickly park their cars here, and the first door would be the door to the core, and they can go to wherever they want to go in the building from there. They also looked at to make it particularly women responsive. They and in public spaces they looked at public restrooms, pink parking lots, I already spoke about them, soul style nursery school, which is basically nursery schools within walking distance of neighborhoods, apartment complexes. And in apartment complexes they did something interesting again. They reserved apartments for single women, working women, visiting women to the city. Walking environments were looked at. They looked at that at times women, they when they walk on the street, and then these paver blocks of there or cracks in the pavements are there where the heels get stuck. So they used a particular kind of pavement where you don't trip and fall and you can walk safely. Public transport they also address agronomically that how the handles and the bars are actually designed, keeping male in mind, which is there are at large at the lengths are higher, so they brought them down. They added additional bars for holding to address the female scale. And then health centers which looked at a one-stop services and even safe houses which are built with convenience stores in the city which operate 24/7, and they also double up as safe houses in the city. So interesting ways of kind of putting functions and support systems in the city, both in terms of infrastructure and different programs in the city which can support women in their caregiving responsibility, and and help them to remain join and remain in the workforce. As a public policy document, we are looking at closer home. This is first time a development plan, which is basically a plan which is done for the city and it is a plan for 20 years or 15 or 20 years, in which how the city will expand, what kind of densities are going to come in the city, and where they can be located. That kind of a blueprint of the city is made, in which in Mumbai, one of the densest cities in India, a development plan with a gender chapter was introduced. And in the gender chapter, they kind of addressed every aspect of the development plan and supported it with functions, infrastructure, services, etc., to say that this is basically a legal document. So everything now, once land is allocated in the city for these functions and services in the city, they have to be built, and and nobody can say no to it. So this is it's a very good public policy document and a public policy, and now it will translate into different kind of functions and programs in the city. So the overall objective was to make women a much larger proportion of Mumbai's workforce by providing opportunities that enhance their experience of working and living in Mumbai. And the development plan proposes to do this by filling some of the spatial gaps and making provisions for women, children, elderly, disabled, and informal sector. So at every ward location, they introduced multi-purpose housing for working women, which means that the housing, like I gave you that example of the fair shared city, something like that, that there are different kind of functions within the housing so that you can save time and it's easier. Neighborhoods with care centers, Aadhaar Kendra, this is something to do with how different citizens card or things like that, which are ID cards of, or identification cards and all, which is basically a documentation could be done, and through these centers, women's skill centers, where women can upskill themselves, homeless shelters. So there were a lot of there are some lot of homeless shelters in the city, and it is deeply problematic, because women um, are seriously abused there. So to kind of reserve from 10% of those shelters for women, vending areas, there's also a kind of uh, very contested area where women, it becomes difficult for women vendors to kind of find a place. So in that zone where the vending is happening, even that zone has been reserved for women vendors, public toilets and housing for women. So again, taking from the sole example, affordable and rental housing for single and women headed families. Some provisions of them have been made in the development plan. With this, we come to the end of this module, and we have learned about some of the challenges women face in public space, how women experience public space differently, and some of the concepts around that, and how cities could be shaped in a more responsive way. We have learned that through some examples of building the cities responsively, some policies and some interventions that could be done. I just want to leave you with this thought that designing cities that work for women creates wider social, economic, and environmental benefits, along with safer, healthier, and more inclusive spaces, not only for women, but for the entire household, neighborhood, communities, and even cities. Thank you. With this, we move to the next module, which is on children friendly urban environment. Thank you.